Revelation is an interesting book. One of the things I really like about the book of Revelation is that it's got a crazy amount of like reread value. Every time you reread it, you're going to catch something that you probably didn't catch the first time or the second time or the third time or so on. And I really enjoy that about this book. Also, it's a book that really makes you kind of look into what are the materials you can figure out to help you understand the book. Because it can be super complex. It can be super hard to understand. There's a lot of layers to it. I want to try to focus on what we've been focusing on the whole quarter, which is Satan's tactics. And specifically in the book of Revelation, what the visions that John has in that book tells us about Satan's tactics and the methods that he uses to tempt Christians and Israelites, and if we go all the way back to Adam and Eve, we have this idea of this cosmic conflict that is repeated throughout all history in the Bible. And I want to take a step back and kind of look at this. I tried to draw this diagram. It's a little small, so apologies. But we're going to kind of take a look at this like panoramic view of the spiritual warfare that we have from between God and the divines and the serpent, the accuser, Satan, and the devil. You guys might remember pretty early on, I think it was the first class, when we were looking specifically at the serpent in the garden, we had talked about how the serpent is trying to get Adam and Eve and then Cain and Abel and so on and so forth to give into this subhuman-like behavior. I called it a lot. I don't know if you remember me talking about this idea that God had an intended purpose for humanity, and that purpose was human. It was a human purpose that was innate to humanity. And when the serpent tempted Adam and Eve, he was tempting them to give into this subhuman or this beastly-like way of living or whatnot. And you might remember we talked about in the Cain and Abel conflict, when he kills his brother, and then later God goes to him and he says, hey, like, what's going on? His blood's crying out to me. Throughout that whole conflict, there was something we touched on, this idea of sin is crouching at the door, right? That idea where it's like a beast, right? Like a lion. It's crouching at the door, waiting to devour you. And that's another callback to this idea of when we sin, we fall out of the intended purpose of humanity, which was to rule with God in Eden, and we give in to this beastly-like nature that is not what God intended. And we see that throughout this panoramic view of spiritual warfare. And so we see the serpent in the garden, like we talked about, right? The influence on Cain, and then Cain goes on and he creates a city, one of the first cities, and then we have this cycle of corruption of humanity and the oppression of Israel or of God's chosen people. And then we have these prophetic visions about like the apocalypse, and we get in this cycle for a long time, right? We have things like, I'm getting way behind on my slides, sorry. Back to that origin of the spiritual conflict, right? So the serpent is cursed. We have Genesis 3:15. There's this prophetic promise that the seed of Eve will be in conflict perpetually with the serpent, and then humanity is cast out, right? And then again, this is what I was talking about with Cain and Abel, and the idea of the serpent is crouching at the door, or sin is crouching at the door waiting to devour you, trying to tempt people back into this subhuman existence. And this is where it keeps going, right? So Cain makes a city, then we've got the Nephilim and the flood narrative, and we've got the Tower of Babel, and we have all these cycles where then, a covenant is made with Israel, but we still have Israel itself, going through these cycles and temptations with idolatry, and they're being oppressed, and there's other nations that come in, and this just kind of cycle that keeps on going. I want to look at how the serpent kind of pivots and has adjusted his tactics all the way through the Bible. From this idea of one-on-one temptation with Adam and Eve, and then with Cain, and then eventually to the point where, similar to like the book of Daniel, where we have these nations now, where Satan or the serpent is influencing his will through these nations, right? And through oppression, and oftentimes, like in Daniel, we see all these visions, very similar to the book of Revelation, of these beasts and all these crazy imagery and things like that. And Daniel interprets those dreams, and what does he interpret all those beasts as? They're these nations, right? That rise and fall, and one takes over another, and then out of the horns come another nation, and we just have this cycle, right? And that is the serpent kind of working his way throughout the course of history, fighting this spiritual warfare with God. And we are right smack dab in the middle of it. So I want to look, you can turn your Bibles to Revelation chapter 12. We're not going to read it just yet, but it's probably good to have open. So we're going to look at some of these cycles. So Satan has taken on this like geopolitical tactic, is what I'm going to call it, where he's working through obviously individuals, right, as he did before, but those individuals can be kings and rulers and people in positions of authority that ultimately lead to oppression of his people. So there's more than just this. This is kind of some of the ones that I picked and put up there. But we have these ancient empires becoming this like manifestation of opposition to God, right? If they're not Israelites, they're coming over and they're just messing things up for the Israelites. With Egypt, we have oppression and genocide. So this the slavery of the Israelites that we see in Exodus 1. Then we have Babylon and this idea of like spiritual displacement. There's the destruction of the temple, which was a huge blow, right? And really, in some ways, how the Israelites kind of found their identity was in their relationship with their God. And so, with that destruction of the temple, it not only put them into a spiritual exile as well, in a way. And then we've got Persia. In Esther 3, we've got Haman's plot of annihilation to pretty much, his goal is I'm going to wipe all these people out. And then Greece. Greece is kind of interesting because we're about to pivot out. Once we get to Greece and into Rome, the tactics kind of have to change again because we kind of pivot out of this like geopolitical thing that the serpent is doing. We'll see that in a minute. But anyways, in Greece, we have Antiochus Epiphanes captures Jerusalem. He was one of the four that after Alexander the Great kind of peaced out and died, he was one of the four that got portions of his kingdom. And then he went in First Maccabees is actually kind of interesting if you want to read that, and it kind of talks about what he did. But he went in and he took all the gold from the temple, and then he made kind of Jerusalem his little own encampment. And then he began this kind of assimilation with the Israelite or the Jewish people. And we see them start to slowly kind of take over Greek ways and kind of lose a little bit of their identity. But what's interesting is throughout all these, I pinpointed four kind of moments in time or four kind of nations that Satan uses, but throughout all of these, God is not silent. And it is a back and forth warfare that we have between the serpent and between God. And I want to look at some of these. You don't have to open your Bible to these, but I will read a couple of them. So we have with Egypt and the oppression, God predicts this. And in Genesis 15, then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country, not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. And then eventually in Ezekiel 29, we have God restoring from that oppression. Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says: at the end of the 40 years, I will gather the Egyptians from the nations where they were scattered, and I will bring them back from captivity and return them to Upper Egypt, the land of their ancestry. There they will be a lowly kingdom. It will be the lowliest of kingdoms and will never again exalt itself above the other nations. I will make it so weak that it will never again rule over the nations. Egypt will no longer be a source of confidence for the people of Israel, but will be a reminder of their sin in turning to her for help. They will know that I am the sovereign Lord. And then we have Babylon, which, remember, was that idea of like spiritual displacement, and the temple was completely destroyed. We have God also predicting, and this idea of also restoring. Again, in Jeremiah 25, we have this whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt, declares the Lord, and I will make it desolate forever. And then moving on to Persia, such a cool story. Read Esther and then go through and read like Ezra and Nehemiah. But we have Cyrus is named as a deliverer, and Cyrus comes on the scene, and there's Isaiah. There's also a psalm that's kind of written about Cyrus, that in which God kind of says like he's going to be the deliverer, and he's kind of the chosen one. And when he comes into power on the scene in Persia, he says, all right. And then obviously we have Ezra and Nehemiah, and they go and eventually rebuild the temple. And then finally with Greece, we have the same idea of God predicting. And this is the last one in Daniel 8, where he is interpreting all of these visions. And he goes on to say that Alexander's kingdom will be, he doesn't name Alexander specifically, but scholars agree. He was talking about Alexander, and then eventually the reign of Greece, that kingdom was split up into four ways. So that leaves us at this new era. We're going to talk about Rome. And this kind of marks a point in time where we had this cycle, this like geopolitical cycle that was going on. And if you zoom out back to that panoramic view, like how long does that go on before tactics change, right? How long before Satan changes tactics? Or how long before God even says like, enough is enough for my people? Obviously, we know the answer because we have the whole Bible. But Rome comes onto the scene and things change pretty significantly. Daniel 2:44 says, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So we have in here, that was supposed to be 40 through 44, sorry. Let's turn there real quick. We have time. Let's turn to Daniel chapter 2. Starting in verse 40. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw, the feet and toes, partly of the potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly made of iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, and they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So this idea of sometime this cycle is going to break down, And sometimes Daniel's almost prophesying, I think, that these kingdoms and these nations are going to dilute themselves so much that they are just so brittle. And God, as the master orchestrator, is going to pick the perfect moment in time to say, okay, Jesus, it's time. And that is this new kingdom that Daniel's talking about in 44. It's a totally new type of kingdom. And it's not going to work with these tactics that Satan's been working with. He's going to have to try to figure out something new. And we'll see eventually that he tries, but it backfires pretty badly. So we have Daniel predicting the Roman Empire, then the heavenly kingdom to rise out of Rome and out of all this, these pieces. And then we even have eventually the prophecy from Jesus about the destruction of Jerusalem. And then we kind of kick off into this age of systematic martyrdom after Jesus' crucifixion, where people are just dying and they're being hunted out and they're being killed. So I know this is a lot. This was, believe it or not, this was a 17-minute intro, and I'm pretty proud of myself because that's a long intro. So we come onto the scene right there at that moment in time where we're hitting this martyrdom and people are dying. What is Satan's tactic? And that's what we're going to look at. What has changed? If we're looking at this panoramic view and we're at that oppression of Christianity, we're about to go read Revelation 12. What's missing here from this panoramic view of spiritual warfare? We went through, the creation account, the fall of man. We have this, these cycles of geopolitical nations and oppression. There's something pretty significant that happens in there before we get to this final moment in Revelation. It's not a trick. Yes, the crucifixion. The crucifixion fits right in here after this break in the cycle where you have the Roman Empire and how diluted and everything that Daniel was talking about. And we have the crucifixion coming in, which really turns the tactic on its head for Satan. No longer is he using these nations to be his instrument to bring about this conflict. Now he has someone on the scene that, as we talked about in the prior weeks, the demons, they knew exactly who he was. And when Jesus arrived on the scene, they knew, okay, something's different. Something's going to have to change. All right, so hop over to Revelation chapter 12, if you're not already there. We're going to do a little bit of reading. All right. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, for which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, going on. Verse 7, now a war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, and he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. I want to pause right there. When I read through that, think back to some of the classes that we've talked about this quarter, and we've talked about Job and Satan being the accuser. And that was his role that he filled. And he went in and out of God's court and talked with God. And he said, hey, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan talks to God and said, they're having a dialogue. He's in his court. That's really interesting to me, right? And we have this language here in Revelation. I'll read it again in verse, at the end of verse 8, but he was defeated and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. So there was a time where there was a place for the accuser and these angels, but there's no longer a place for them in heaven. Going on, and that great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. So when we have this paradigm shift where the serpent's no longer using nations to try to get to people, what does he turn to? What's his new tactic in this new age where we have martyrdom? This is post-crucifixion, right? That John is writing this revelation to 7 churches, but ultimately he knew it would go far beyond those 7 churches. What's the tactic that he's going to use? You have Christians dying left and right. The thing that I would think would probably work the best is fear of death. And what does Jesus do to combat that? He defeated death. He showed that the one thing that you might think that Satan can use against you can be overcome. And so while we see that Satan, he's transitioning through these tactics, right? And he's, potentially even working in and through Rome at the time, leading to the crucifixion of Jesus, that ultimately backfired, because that became the exact mechanism for redemption. God has defeated death, and Jesus showed us that death can be defeated. And so when John is writing this to these churches who are suffering through persecution, that is his goal. He's telling them, hey, Satan's tactic is to get you to fear death. But guess what? We have the Lamb, the slain Lamb, that showed us that death has been defeated. Any thoughts? I told John I was going to take comments, so I'm going to pause now. I know I've been talking for a long time. Any thoughts?
I just said there's a comment in Zechariah about Satan being an accuser as well. So
Yeah.
it seemed to be, he did have a place in heaven at one point.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, the comment was there's a verse in Zechariah that talks about, Satan, his role as an accuser, like very similar language to Job. It's like a courtroom-style word in Hebrew. Absolutely. I think that's John I think affirms that here in Revelation when he's describing who the dragon is. Definitely, yeah. There was a time where he had a place, and something happened. We're not going to get into that, but something happened. And a big war happened, and Satan was cast out with all of his little bad angels to earth. What I think is really interesting is the fact that all of the angels, along with Michael, they rejoice over the fact that he's no longer there, but they mourn the fact that he's going to be at earth and that we're going to have to deal with him or something. I don't know. Yeah, good thought. Any other thoughts? Okay, all right. I saw a bunch of people that I thought were about to say something, but they didn't. All right. I want to read real quick because we do have time. I think we're actually going to be done early. Knock on wood. I think we're going to be. We're gonna do this. I do want to read 1 Corinthians real quick, chapter 2. All right. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, starting in verse 10. This is when I was talking about how any participation that Satan might have had in leading to the crucifixion or encouraging for that to be done. We know we had the Pharisees really wanted that to happen, but ultimately, I had mentioned it backfired because that showed not only the Jews, but it also showed Satan what he was dealing with. I want to read starting in chapter 2, verse 6. Yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages of our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Well, never mind. All right, we're going to keep going. Revelation chapter 13. We're going to dive back in. Any thoughts before we move on? Everyone's got Christmas on the brain. Yeah.
I read about rulers of the age understood it. I guess I always kind of thought that meant that if they'd really known who Jesus was, they wouldn't have done it. Maybe it's from the standpoint that, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, maybe it's from the standpoint that we don't want God to accomplish his purposes, so we will try to frustrate it by not killing Jesus. I don't know, what side do you land on?
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's a good thought. I think it depends on how you define like who those rulers are. Are we talking about Rome? Are we talking about the Pharisees? I think also it could be both. I think no one understood the consequences of what Jesus was about to do. And so I think, yeah, I mean, he became the ultimate martyr in a way, right? And they glorified that by crucifying him and him raising from the dead. So I think, yeah, it backfired for, I think, the Rome a little bit, and they, tried to snuff that out. I think it really backfired for the Pharisees, right? Because it gave the Christians a lot of ammunition that, hey, this Jesus guy is actually the Messiah. But yeah, I don't know. I think it could be interpreted multiple ways, and I don't think either way is wrong, I guess. I don't know. That's just me. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Richard?
I think he still uses that same tactic today in terms of the world around us as a means of putting a wedge between us and God. I'm thinking about Ephesians, the 6th chapter, and there he says, for our struggle is not against, well, he talks about the schemes of the devil, standing firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. And then he says, so put on the full armor of God.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't just for something for Paul to do back when Rome was in power.
Totally.
But it's what we're to do today. There are people of influence, people of authority, people of power, people who are able to shake the world up that affects our lives. And that's why Paul says, pray for kings and those in authority that you can live a peaceful and quiet life. Because if you don't, it's going to get hard.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, great point. I mean, it's not just bad rulers, right? Cyrus that let the people out of Persia, right? Like there are totally. I think that's a great comment. And I think also when I say Satan is changing his tactic throughout here, really a better example would be he's getting a new ability, right? He's leveling up in a way. But yeah, totally. He still uses all those tactics as before, and that's why put on the full armor of God, right, and all the fruit of the Spirit. Good comment. Any other comments? All right, we're gonna move on. All right, Revelation chapter 13. So we're gonna look at these two beasts. Starting in verse 1, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. We're going to continue in verse 13 of chapter 12. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood, but the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river. This is a total tangent. I think it's really interesting. Like the language here is very similar to the flood, where the flood, the earth opened and the waters came out. And this is kind of like the inverse of that. Again, total tangent. I just think it's interesting. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring and those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. We're not going to get into like all the 50 different interpretations of this. Just know that it can be multifaceted, right? When we think about the woman and what this means, obviously we might think of Mary. We might think of Israel as a nation and the descendants being the tribes of Israel. There's all sorts of interpretations. Go talk to Richard. He loves talking about this stuff. So just go corner him sometime and ask him about all the symbols in Revelation. We're going to keep going. So verse 1 of chapter 13. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast, and they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given to it over every tribe and the people of and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. So keep in mind where we're at with the tactics right now. We talked about we're in this period of martyrdom. People are dying left and right. The Roman Empire is trying to get all these Christians, kill them, make examples of them. And you're one of these churches and you read that. Does that resonate with you or not? I think it does. It resonates with me. When you put yourself in that situation and fear of death is what is constantly on your mind, or giving into Satan's tactics and saying, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go over here and be safe." When I put myself in that situation, I'm sometimes scared to think, man, what would I do? So looking at these beasts, there's, like I said, lots of interpretations. This is one that I think is one of the more popular ones, but we'll get the mic running again. I'm sure there's other thoughts. The first beast is commonly thought to be this idea of this military machine. And if you take the lens of the Roman Empire, which I think a lot of scholars do, throughout this as he's describing the power and the people worshiping this first beast, the idea is that the earth turned to this beast and its power, and it conquered land, and it was like, all right, that's what we're going to do. Oh, man, I got a little cocky when I said we were not going to run out of time. And then we also have Daniel, who's calling, John is calling back to Daniel, the book of Daniel, where he's pointing out that beasts, where the beasts in the dreams that he interprets get their power, and it's mirroring back to this dragon, who we know that John tells us is the serpent or the devil or the accuser. And then again, we have that subhuman beastly imagery coming back. All right, so first beast, ideas like military, the machine, Roman Empire, insert whatever nation you would like. I want to go really quickly and look at the second beast. In verse 11, then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all authority of the first beast in its presence, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives all those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived, and it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both great, small and great, both rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of the man, and his number is 666. Just to get it out of the way, I'll talk about what I think the mark of the beast is. There's a lot of different ideas. It's very clear, and scholars agree, that the writer of Revelation, although it was written in Greek, was a Hebrew guy. The Greek that he wrote it in was kind of disjointed and a little unorthodox and not very common. So it's commonly believed and upheld by scholars that he was a very Hebrew-educated individual. A common interpretation for 666 is the Emperor Nero. In Hebrew, numbers and letters were used the same way, and you would spell out Nero, and it would that word, if it were a number, would be 666. That's a common thing I saw a lot. Again, I'm sure there's a million different ideas. I don't want to get into that, so we're not going to. What I do want to get into is this idea that with the second beast, it's this beast that is an extension of the first beast. And the goal of this beast is to point back to the first beast, who, keep in mind, was a mirror of the dragon that fell to earth. And the idea being that this is like the propaganda machine, right? And if you keep that Roman Empire mentality, and he talks about the ability to trade and like commerce and the economy and things like that. The idea that this beast upholds and forces you into this mechanism in which you give into the nation, or you give into the Roman Empire. Again, I think this is a call that John is giving to all of those who are being persecuted and dealing with martyrdom, that, hey, there's going to be carrots that they dangle, right? And it's going to be tempting to give in and not, and to, denounce God and Jesus. But keep in mind that it's just a beast, right? And it's a beast that points all the way back and is a mirror image of the dragon. So what's the point? We are just about at time. We see, if we go on, the last section we're going to read is Revelation 20, really fast, because I didn't want to end on a super depressing note. In the same way that we have the crucifixion and Jesus defeating death and showing us that Satan can't use death against us, and ultimately the people that were being persecuted and killed, Satan can't use death against us. In the same way, God defeats Satan once and for all, and he kills him and destroys his people and sends Satan down to the depths. But that's not the point. The point is this right here. Go read Revelation 20. This is what I want to leave you with for the whole quarter. God has a defined purpose for humanity, and it is to rule with him. And the cover-to-cover story of the Bible is God getting us back to him and getting us back to a place where we dwell and rule with him. And Satan has no power anymore. I know we're at time. I hope this has been enjoyable for you guys. I know it's been enjoyable for me and for Jake. We've had a great time. I hope, likewise, you have enjoyed it. Just remember this. Our purpose is to rule with God. And he's going to make that happen. We just have to resist Satan. So thank you all for your